Um, so the first thing to know is that the code that handles all of the hiding and showing, it lives on sheet 1. It doesn't live in the module. This module here is just for the formatting, which I'll explain later. So the code here is for the sheet 1, so the show hide template sheet. And I mentioned that we use a particular event. So this private sub worksheet selection change, this event is triggered whenever the selection changes on the current worksheet. You can see along the top here that we've got the worksheet object, and we have the ability to insert other code stubs. So if I were to, let's say, activate the sheet, I could put code in here, and this code would run every time we activated the sheet, every time we clicked on it, or came into that sheet from a different sheet. This code inside those areas would run. But instead, I've got code that's going to trigger every time we change the selection in the sheet. So the first thing we do is we've got a few conditions. I want to very quickly weed out any clicks that aren't meant to be expanding or hiding the columns. So the first thing that I do is I count for, I look at the target value count. So when this event is triggered, we get a reference to the cells that the user clicked on. That's the target value here. It has the range property, which means that it can be a selection of more than one. So if the user is just clicking on one cell, yep, we want to expand. If they're selecting multiple cells or they're selecting an entire column or row, then we don't want to trigger that cell. We don't want to trigger that function. So then we'll exit the sub if we have more than one value clicked. If we're clicking outside of column 1, so if the target.column is not equal to 1, again, we're going to exit the sub. You might want to put your expand and collapse function somewhere else, but I've chosen to put mine on column 1. So you can change this line of code if you want that to be in a different location. Another thing that we want to check is, do we have the lowest hierarchy? So up here I've sort of described the level descriptions from family, data in column B, grandparent, data in column C, parent and child in D and E. So the E column corresponds to 5 here. If the 5 is not equal to blank, then that must mean that we are at the child level. So we're not going to try and look for anything to hide or show under a child, because a child is the lowest level. Okay, so the next thing that we'll do is we'll go into counting through or checking to see what we have in the original cell that we clicked on. So we want to find out if the target row, target column is not equal to blank. If that first clicked on cell is a blank item, then we don't want to do anything, because I've got the desire to leave some blank rows in the sheet to break up the families. So between family A and B, I've got this blank row in here, and I think that looks better. So I don't want anything to happen there. I only want something to happen when I click on B. So we're only going into this last sort of area if this condition is satisfied. Now we're going to use I as the variable to count through each of the rows under the one that we've clicked on. And I've used the long data type here because it's possible that the user is going to have more rows than we could handle with an integer. It's not much more memory in the days of of most computers having at least 4 gigabytes to go from an integer to a long. So we're not in any danger of running out of space there, but I just thought I'd explain if anyone was curious as to why I've used long and not integer. If we had more than 32,000 rows, the sub would break at this point. The function would break and we'd get an error. So by using long, it means that it doesn't matter how much data is put into the spreadsheet, we can go up to over 1 million rows and we'll still be able to function. We're going to start looking at the row immediately below the row that we clicked on. So this target row, that's the one we clicked on. We add 1 to it, so we're starting below that one. We'll start looking for the children there. We're going to declare this J integer. This is going to be the integer for the columns. So I'm going to start this one off at column 4, so that corresponds to column D, because we've already checked the value in column 5. We've already checked that and found that column 5 is not blank, so we just need to now check is column 4 blank. If column 4 is blank, then we check the next one. Is column 3 blank? Then we check the next one. Is column 2 blank? So what this is doing is it's basically looking at the items here. We've already checked that this cell, say we clicked on A, we've already checked that this cell is not blank. Then we check this one, that's blank. We check this one, that's blank. This one is not blank. So now we've found the level we're at, and now the function is able to check all of the A's. It's going to look for all of those. Right, we've found the level that we're at. We can now start checking through our row and our column and checking that this value matches the target row and the column there. So if we, as I said before, if we clicked on A, this is the cell that we're going to check. We're going to check that each child matches A. And this allows us to go through all of these items, checking that all of them are D, and only once we find one that is different, either because it's blank or because it's E or because it's something different, once we find something else, then we're going to stop checking and we know that we've found our last item. Now, because of the way that this is going to count up, it's going to keep increasing every time that we find the last item. And if we find the last item in here, so I go to D, I'm going to count down true, true, true. We now end up in this column, this row, but this row is blank. So the next thing that we do is we actually decrease that count by 1. We go back up 1 cell. So we're just on the last child. So I've clicked on D, I've gone from 42 through to 314, or I've gone to 315, then I go back to 314. So this is now the range that I'm working with, the selection here. This check, so that we're just about to start actually hiding rows and showing rows, but this check here, this just makes sure that we have actually found at least one descendant. So the cell that we've clicked on has at least one descendant under it. If this condition is not true, it's basically saying that the target row is equal to I, and we would just hide the cell itself because it has no children, but we don't want that to happen. So assuming that we've satisfied the above condition, we now call this toggle hide rows function. So we'll go in there and explain that in a second. And after the rows have been hidden or shown, we then select a different cell. This is just so that the user has the option to double click. I can sort of click there, click again. You can see my selection keeps getting pulled across to column B, and that just lets me quickly say expand, collapse, expand, collapse. Okay, so what does the toggle hide rows function do? So we pass in a couple of bits of data. We tell the program what's the first row that we want to start in. We tell the program what's the second row that the last row that we're going to look at. And we also tell the program what column is the important column for us to look at. So we have, in this case, we would say we'd pass in 42. If I clicked on D, I clicked on this cell A41, we would pass in 42 as the start, 314 as the end, and we would pass in 2 corresponding to column B for the column that has the important information. We're going to turn the screen off, so application.screen updating. This means that as we're going through and hiding or showing individual rows, we're not seeing each row be shown one at a time. We actually turn the screen off, we hide all the rows, then we turn the screen back on again. It just improves the performance of the macro, makes it run faster. So we are going to check first up, is the very first row under the row that we've clicked on hidden? If that first row is hidden, then our process in here is going to have to be unhiding things. So I'll talk through that in a second. If the first row below is not hidden, well then that's really easy. We just hide everything that we're given. We hide from the start row through to the end row, and that's really straightforward. So let's assume that's not the case. We've got the first row, the first descendant is hidden. So how do we decide which rows are going to be made open again? So we'll declare this I variable again to count down our rows. We'll start at the first row. And here I've got a select case, which I'll explain shortly, based around the column. the column that we started with. So if this function was passed a column of 2, what does that actually mean? It means that we were passed a column that corresponds to D. Now I don't want to unhide all of the children and parents items. I just want to hide under D. When I click on A41, I just want to open up all of the immediate descendants of D. I don't want to hide up the descendants of those descendants and their descendants as well. I don't want to do that. So how do we check that function? Well, from D, if I look across here, all of these cells are blank for all the ones I want to open, except that one there. I don't want to open this one, and it's not blank. So that corresponds to column 4. And that's what we do in this part here. We say, okay, if we were past column 2 to look at, instead we're going to now start looking at 4. If we were past column 3, so if we were given, let's say in here, if we were at this level, at the D12 level, so we would have been past 3, we want to find all of the 12 items, then we don't want to look just here. These are the ones that we want to open up. We don't want to open up anything that has a value in column 5. So all of the children of these values, we don't want to open those up. They've all got values in column 5. And then the last case, so if we've been given a parent that can only have children, I'm basically, this is a little bit of a hack. It's not the most elegant code. This number just corresponds to the last column at the very far right of Excel. And I've used that because it's probably the most likely to be blank. We would get an error if something was put in there, but I think it's very unlikely that the user will put something there. And it makes all of these, this part here, means that the next check, once I do this check here, it's going to be really easy. So I could make this more elegant, but it would require a lot more code. So I say, no, let's keep it simple. Remember, if you ever feel like you're doing something in programming that it feels like a bit of a hack, but it just works, you can always remember the old adage that a processor is basically just a rock that we tricked into thinking. And I use that to remind myself to not take coding too seriously if there's a little bit of a hack that just works. Next thing that we want to do, we're going to now start, we've selected our appropriate columns. We're now going to loop through all of our rows. So from our start row through to our end row, we're going to check each one. We're going to see if our target column is blank. If it is blank, then we've got an immediate descendant of the cell that was initially clicked on. So we're going to unhide just that row, and then we go on to the next row, and we just keep doing that the whole way through. Finally, we turn the application screen updating back on. So that's how this works. If you need to make any changes in here, you could add, say you wanted to add a couple more levels, so you didn't just have the 4 levels that I've got. If you wanted to add a 5th or a 6th level, or if you wanted to delete levels and you still wanted the code to work, you could just add in some extra cases here. As long as the last case has this value in it, you could easily add case 4 equals col 6, case 6 equals col 7, and it would work. And the last thing that I'll quickly talk about is the formatting tool. So again, if we go back to these cells here, anything that I put in these cells, any values or anything, if I want to change the color of this across the top, and I want to change this to be in italic and underlined, and I can do any sort of crazy things along here and make it look really ugly. When I click that format button, it's going to carry through to the other sheets. I'll just explain how that works. So the first thing that we need to do is we have this line which is disabling events. So enable events equals false. As I mentioned before, the worksheet function here, this worksheet selection change, this is triggered by an event. So an event has very specific language in programming terms. It means there is some kind of some sort of process which sends out a message and says this event has happened. In Excel, there is an event based on the selection changing in the document, and we don't want, while I'm making all these formatting changes, I don't want those events to trigger, because that's going to basically call all of the code in here every time we try to run the formatting. So we turn that off first up. Now, the button that calls this code is located on the second sheet, on the formatting sheet. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select sheet 1. We're going to activate sheet 1 because that's where we're going to make all the changes. And then we're also going to turn off the screen updating. Again, this will just improve our performance issues. So as with before, we've selected our I variable to start counting through rows. We're declaring this as a long, so we can count through all 1,200 and whatever thousand rows in Excel. And we're going to start at the first row. So it's possible if you want to edit this sheet that you want to put something in row 1 that you actually don't want to change. That would be easy to fix. You could change this to start at 2 or 3 or start at anything under that. So now we're going to keep looping through all of the rows until we come up against 2 rows in a row which are blank. So both the current row, that's row I, and the row after one need to be blank. And if they're both blank, then we're going to break the loop, and we're going to turn our screen back on and turn our events back on. And the reason that it's 2 in a row and not just the 1 is because, again, I like to have this space. I like to have this white space between the families. So I want to be able to apply the formatting from the top to the bottom and have it go all the way down. And it skips over these individual blanks, and only when it finds 2 blanks in a row will the loop break. If you wanted to format your data differently, you could add, say you wanted to have a double break for some reason, or put some other sort of formatting around, then you could add in another condition here to check for a 3rd blank in a row, or some other trigger. You can do it any number of ways. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the with function. So the with function lets us continually make a reference to sheet 2. So continually make a reference to the formatting sheet every time we use the dot. And this is really handy. By having one sheet selected and having a different sheet that is using with, I'm able to refer to both sheets differently just by either not including a dot or including a dot before the section. So sheet 1 will be called whenever I use a reference like this. Cells I5, that's referring to sheet 1, but dot range A8 to I8, because I've got the dot in there, that's going to be a reference to sheet 2. So this is basically, this section is saying if we have level 5, so if we're down to the child level because the child is not blank, then we're going to copy the information from A8 to I8. So I go back here. You can see this is A8 to I8 here. This is the child formatting. And it's the same with everything else. If I go to the next level, so if the above condition is not true, we're then going to check for a parent or a grandparent. We're going to apply the right formatting from those two, and now we start by just copying that, copying those cells. If you wanted to add more, again, if you wanted to add more data rows, so if you want to go back in here and you want to add more. Not rows, sorry, more columns. If you want to add more columns of data and you want the formatting to carry across, then you can spread more columns along here, and you would just need to change these values so that they reference the extra columns that you've added. So if all of these are blank, then we're going to skip the paste. So if we've got a fully blank row, we're going to go to this item here, which is going to skip. This is where we do the pasting. We're going to basically skip over that, and we're just going to go on to the next item instead. But if any of these conditions are true, then we're not skipping. We're actually going in here. We are selecting on sheet 1. We're selecting the appropriate part of sheet 1, the current row, cells I to I1 to 9. Again, if you're going to add more formatting, you will need to increase, or add more columns, you'll need to increase the number 9 to a larger number that's equal to whatever your total is, your total columns is. Now we are pasting the value, so we do a paste special, we just paste the formats, and we just do this cut copy mode false. Doesn't, I guess, really need to be in there, but the cut copy mode false just makes this thing go away. So that's how we copy and paste all that stuff. I'd make one more thing that I want to mention, which is that you'll notice I'm using sheets 1 and I'm not using the string reference show hide template. And that's because I want the user to be able to rename the sheets. If the user goes in here and renames this sheet, I still want the code to function. So show hide template will always be sheet 1. Unless I go in and manually change it through here, it's still going to be sheet 1, but the user can change the actual name. So now that I've made these nice tacky changes on here, let's click the format button and just see that it's all working. It takes a few seconds, and then we'll go back to the main sheet itself. And oh, look at that! Isn't that a horrible color scheme? But this is good because it allows, I mean, not this color scheme is good, but the ability to quickly format the document like this. It allows people to quickly see if a particular formatting style is going to be easier to use or is going to suit a particular function. So yeah, that's about all there is really to say about this document. I think it's pretty useful, and I hope that you'll find some use for it. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments about the spreadsheet in the comments below for this YouTube video. Otherwise, I'd like to thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe this video if you liked it and you want to see videos like this in future. Yeah, I hope to see you in the next one. Thanks.